The $50 fine taped to my front door was just the beginning of what would become the most bizarre summer of my life in Ridgemont, Pennsylvania. I stared at the bright orange paper fluttering in the morning breeze, my coffee mug frozen halfway to my lips as I read the words. Violation of HOA Code Section 12.4. Unauthorized livestock structure. My chicken coop. They were fining me for my chicken coop. I had moved to Willow Creek Estates 6 months ago, a pleasant neighborhood of cookie-cutter colonials about 20 minutes outside Pittsburgh. The place seemed perfect when I bought it, a nice quiet suburb where I could finally have some space after years of apartment living in the city. I am Sebastian Reynolds, 34 years old, and I had been dreaming of keeping chickens since I was a kid visiting my grandfather's farm in rural Ohio. The coop was not even that big. I had built it myself in the back corner of my yard, a neat little structure that housed 6 chickens, 2 Rhode Island Reds, 2 Barred Rocks, and 2 Buff Orpingtons. They were quiet, clean, and provided me with fresh eggs every morning. My neighbors on either side had no problem with them. Jim Patterson to my left actually loved getting a dozen eggs every couple of weeks, and the elderly couple to my right, the Hendersons, thought the chickens were charming. But apparently, someone had a problem. I pulled the notice off my door and marched back inside, grabbing my laptop to check the HOA bylaws I had skimmed when I bought the house. Sure enough, buried in subsection 12.4, there was a clause about livestock. No livestock or farm animals permitted on residential properties without prior written approval from the HOA board. I had not even thought to check. Chickens were practically pets in my mind, not livestock. The notice stated I had 14 days to remove the structure and the animals or face escalating fines of $100 per week. There was a phone number at the bottom for the HOA president. I dialed it immediately. Willow Creek HOA, this is Deborah speaking. The voice was sharp, clipped, the kind of tone that suggested she had better things to do than talk to me. Hi, this is Sebastian Reynolds from 412 Maple Drive. I just received a notice about my chicken coop and I wanted to discuss this. I was not aware of the livestock restriction when I built it, and I would like to apply for the written approval mentioned in the bylaws. There was a pause, then a sigh that could have extinguished birthday candles from across the room. Mr. Reynolds, the approval process is for special circumstances only. Chickens are not a special circumstance. They are a nuisance, they attract pests, and they lower property values. Have you received any complaints about my chickens specifically? I asked, keeping my voice level. They are well maintained, quiet, and my immediate neighbors have no issues with them. I have received a complaint, yes, Deborah said. And as HOA president, it is my responsibility to enforce our community standards. The fine stands. You have 14 days. Can I at least come to the next board meeting to make my case? Another sigh. The next meeting is not until next month. Your 14 days will be up by then. I suggest you start making arrangements, Mr. Reynolds. Good day. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there staring at my phone, anger bubbling up in my chest. This was insane. I had done my research before getting chickens. They were legal in Ridgemont. The town had no ordinances against them in residential areas. The only barrier was this HOA rule, and I had not been given any chance to comply before being fined. Over the next few days, I did what any reasonable person would do. I printed out studies showing that properly maintained chicken coops do not attract pests or lower property values. I got written statements from Jim and the Hendersons supporting my chickens. I even had my coop inspected by a local agricultural extension agent who certified it met all standards for sanitary and humane chicken keeping. Armed with this evidence, I decided to go directly to Deborah's house. I had looked up the HOA board members online and found that Deborah Morrison lived in one of the larger homes at the entrance to the neighborhood, a sprawling colonial with an immaculate lawn and flower beds that looked like they belonged in a magazine. I rang the doorbell at 6 o'clock on a Thursday evening, hoping to catch her after work. The door opened to reveal a woman in her late 40s with blonde hair styled in that specific way that required standing appointments at an expensive salon. She wore yoga pants and a designer hoodie, and her expression went from neutral to annoyed the moment she recognized me. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, not quite a greeting. "Mrs. Morrison, I was hoping we could talk about the chicken situation. I have some documentation I think you should see." I held up my folder of papers. She did not even glance at it. "There is nothing to discuss. The rules are clear." "But the rules allow for approval. I am just asking for the chance to present my case to the board." "The board supports my decision," she said firmly. "And frankly, Mr. Reynolds, this neighborhood has certain standards. We are not a farm. If you wanted to keep chickens, you should have bought property in a rural area." "This is a legal use of my property under town ordinances," I said, struggling to keep my temper in check. "The HOA restriction seems excessive, especially since my chickens cause no problems." Deborah's expression hardened. "I will tell you what the problem is, Mr. Reynolds. The problem is that people like you move into established neighborhoods and think the rules do not apply to them. You think you can do whatever you want without considering how it affects the rest of us. Well, that is not how it works here. You signed the HOA agreement when you bought your house. You are bound by it." "I am not trying to skirt the rules," I said. "I am trying to work within them. All I am asking for is a hearing. And I am telling you no. Remove the chickens, Mr. Reynolds. You have 10 days left." She closed the door in my face. I stood there on her perfect porch with my folder of useless documentation, feeling my face burn with humiliation and anger. This was not about the chickens. This was about control. Deborah Morrison got off on enforcing rules and making people comply. I had seen her type before, people who found their power in homeowners associations and wielded it like a weapon. But I was not going to roll over. The next day, I contacted a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. His name was Marcus Chen, and his office was in downtown Pittsburgh. I drove in on my lunch break and laid out the situation. Marcus listened carefully, reviewed my documentation, and then leaned back in his chair with a thoughtful expression. "You have a decent case," he said. "The HOA bylaws do allow for approval, and they did not follow proper procedure by issuing a fine without first giving you notice of the violation and an opportunity to correct it or seek approval. However, fighting an HOA is expensive and time-consuming. Are you prepared for that?" "How expensive are we talking?" "Could be a few $1,000s, depending on how far they want to take it, and it could take months to resolve." I did a quick mental calculation of my savings. It would hurt, but I could manage it. What are my chances of winning? Maybe 60%. The issue is that HOA bylaws give boards a lot of discretion. Even if we argue they did not follow procedure, they could just restart the process correctly and end up at the same place. Your best bet would be arguing selective enforcement. Do you know if anyone else in the neighborhood has chickens or has violated similar rules without being fined? I had not thought of that. I do not know. I could ask around. Do that. If we can show they are targeting you specifically while allowing others to break the same rules, we have a much stronger case. I left Marcus's office with a game plan. Over the weekend, I walked around the neighborhood, knocking on doors and chatting with neighbors. Most people were friendly enough. though several had clearly already heard about my dispute with Deborah. Opinion was split. Some people thought the chicken ban was ridiculous. Others worried about property values and precedent. But I did not find anyone else with chickens. I did, however, find several other violations of HOA rules that seemed to be going unenforced. The Martins on Oak Street had painted their shutters a shade of blue that was not on the approved color list. The Kowalskis had a shed that exceeded the size limits spelled out in the bylaws. And at least 3 houses had lawn ornaments that violated the tasteful decoration clause. When I mentioned these violations to people, they all said the same thing. Deborah had never bothered them about it. Selective enforcement. That was my angle. I reported back to Marcus, and he drafted a letter to the HOA board citing the procedural failures and the selective enforcement issue. He sent it via certified mail, copying all board members, not just Deborah. The letter requested that the fine be rescinded, and that I be given a proper hearing to apply for approval of my chicken coop. For a few days, nothing happened. Then I received a response, not from Deborah but from another board member named Richard Walsh. His letter was more conciliatory in tone. He acknowledged that there may have been procedural issues with how the fine was issued, and he invited me to attend an emergency board meeting the following week to present my case. I felt a surge of hope. Maybe reason would prevail after all. The meeting was held at the community clubhouse, a small building near the neighborhood pool. When I arrived, all 5 board members were seated at a table at the front of the room. Deborah was in the center, flanked by Richard Walsh, a man in his 60s with gray hair and glasses, and 3 other members I did not recognize. 2 middle-aged women and a younger man, maybe in his 30s. There were also about 20 other residents in attendance, seated in folding chairs. Word had gotten around, and people were curious to see how this would play out. Deborah called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. She went through some routine business first, clearly making me wait. Finally, she looked up at me with an expression of profound disinterest. "Mr. Reynolds, you have requested an opportunity to present your case regarding your chicken coop. You have 10 minutes. I stood and walked to the front of the room, my folder in hand. I had prepared a short presentation, and I launched into it, explaining how I had researched chicken keeping, how my coop met all safety and sanitation standards, how my immediate neighbors supported it, and how chickens were legal under town ordinances. I showed photos of the coop, my certification from the agricultural extension agent, and my written statements from Jim and the Hendersons. Then I pivoted to the procedural issues. I was never given notice of the violation before being fined, I said. According to the bylaws, violations should be reported to the homeowner with a reasonable opportunity to correct them before fines are assessed. I was also never given the chance to apply for approval before the fine was issued. Additionally, I have identified several other properties in this neighborhood with violations that have not been enforced. This suggests selective enforcement, which is not permitted under Pennsylvania HOA law. I could see Deborah's jaw tighten as I spoke. Richard Walsh, on the other hand, looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat and glancing at the papers in front of him. When I finished, Deborah did not miss a beat. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Does anyone on the board have questions?" Richard raised his hand tentatively. "I do think Mr. Reynolds makes a fair point about procedure. Perhaps we should have issued a notice of violation first." "The fine can serve as a notice," Deborah snapped. "It is within our discretion." "Actually," I interjected, "under Pennsylvania law, HOAs must follow their own bylaws." "Your bylaws clearly outline a process that was not followed." Deborah shot me a look that could have melted steel. "Are you a lawyer, Mr. Reynolds?" No, but I have consulted with one. I see. Well, the board will take your comments under advisement. We will deliberate and issue a decision within 7 days. Can I speak? A voice called from the audience. It was Jim Patterson, my neighbor. He stood up, looking a bit nervous but determined. I just want to say that I live right next to Sebastian, and his chickens have never bothered me once. They do not smell, they are not loud, and he keeps the coop really clean. I think this is a lot of fuss over nothing. Thank you, Jim, Deborah said in a tone that made it clear she did not actually care about his opinion. Anyone else? Mrs. Henderson also stood. My husband and I enjoy seeing the chickens. They are lovely animals, and Sebastian is a responsible owner. We support him keeping them. A few other people spoke, some in my favor, some against. One woman, a friend of Deborah's based on their chummy exchange, complained about the precedent it would set. If we allow chickens, what is next? Goats? Pigs? Where does it end? Chickens are not exactly a gateway drug to farm animals, I muttered, probably louder than I should have. Deborah's eyes narrowed. That will be enough, Mr. Reynolds. The board will deliberate and issue a decision. This meeting is adjourned. I left feeling like I had done everything I could, but also with a sinking feeling that Deborah had already made up her mind and the rest of the board would fall in line. Sure enough, 7 days later, I received a letter. The fine was upheld. The board had voted 3-2 to deny my request for approval. I was ordered to remove the chickens and dismantle the coop within 7 days or face escalating fines. I called Marcus immediately. They denied it. Not surprising, he said. Do you want to fight this in court? I thought about the cost, the time, the stress. I thought about Deborah's smug face and her casual cruelty. I thought about my chickens who had done nothing wrong. Yes, I said, let us fight it. Marcus filed a complaint in the Court of Common Pleas for Allegheny County, alleging that the HOA had violated its own bylaws, engaged in selective enforcement, and acted in bad faith. The legal process moved slowly, but Marcus was able to get a temporary injunction preventing the HOA from assessing further fines until the case was resolved. Deborah was furious. She started showing up at my house unannounced, taking photos of my coop from the street, documenting every tiny detail as if she were building a criminal case. She sent me nasty emails about being a troublemaker and a lawsuit abuser. She even posted on the neighborhood Facebook group, not naming me directly but making it very clear who she was talking about entitled homeowners who thought they were above the rules. The stress was getting to me. I loved my chickens, but I was starting to wonder if they were worth all this. Then something strange started happening in the neighborhood. It was late June, and the weather had turned hot and humid, perfect conditions for insects. People started complaining about ticks. At first, it was just a few mentions on the neighborhood Facebook group. Someone found a tick on their dog. Someone else found one on their kid after playing in the yard. Nothing too alarming. Ticks were common in Pennsylvania in the summer. But then the reports started multiplying. By the second week of July, it seemed like everyone was finding ticks. Not just one or two, but dozens. People were pulling them off their pets daily. Kids were coming inside covered in them. The neighborhood pool had to close temporarily because ticks were found in the grass around it. I noticed I was not having the same problem. My yard was virtually tick-free. I would find maybe 1 or 2 a week on my dog, compared to the infestations my neighbors were reporting. Then Jim mentioned something interesting. You know, I have not been getting ticks in my yard like everyone else. I wonder if it is because I am next to your chickens. That got me thinking. I did some research and discovered that chickens are voracious tick eaters. A single chicken can eat dozens of ticks per day, and they actively hunt for them in grass and underbrush. My 6 chickens had been keeping my yard, and apparently Jim's yard by proximity, virtually tick-free. I posted about this on the neighborhood Facebook group, citing sources and studies about chickens as natural tick control. The response was immediate and divided. Some people were intrigued and asked questions. Others, clearly Deborah's allies, dismissed it as a self-serving attempt to justify my rule breaking. But as the tick problem got worse, attitudes started to shift. By the end of July, the neighborhood was in crisis mode. Several children had been diagnosed with Lyme disease. The HOA had hired a pest control company to spray the common areas, but it was not making a dent. People were afraid to let their kids play outside. The local news even did a story about the tick outbreak in Willow Creek Estates. That was when Richard Walsh called me. "Sebastian, it is Richard from the HOA board. Do you have a minute to talk?" "Sure," I said, curious. "I wanted to ask you about your chickens and the tick thing. Is it true that your property is not affected, pretty much?" "I mean, I still find a tick occasionally, but nothing like what everyone else is reporting." "And you really think it is because of the chickens?" "I do. Chickens eat ticks like candy. It is one of the reasons people keep them, especially in rural areas." There was a long pause. "Would you be willing to present this information to the board? I think we need to reconsider our position." I almost laughed. "Richard, you guys just spent the last 2 months fining me and fighting me in court over these chickens." "I know, and I voted against the fine, for what it is worth. But this tick situation is serious. If chickens can help, we need to explore that option. Will you come to the next board meeting? Will Deborah actually listen?" "I will make sure she does." I agreed, mostly out of curiosity to see how this would play out. The board meeting was packed. Every seat was filled and people were standing along the walls. The tick crisis had everyone's attention. When I arrived, I could feel the mood in the room. People were scared and frustrated, and they were looking for solutions. Deborah called the meeting to order, and she looked worse for wear. Her usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled, and there were dark circles under her eyes. Apparently, her family had been hit by the tick problem too. "We have invited Mr. Reynolds to speak about a potential solution to our tick issue," Richard said, taking the lead. "Sebastian." I stood and presented the same information I had posted online, but in more detail. I explained how chickens are natural foragers who eat insects, including ticks, mosquitoes, and other pests. I showed data from studies demonstrating that properties with free-ranging chickens have significantly lower tick populations. I explained that my property and Jim's property, which bordered mine, had been largely spared from the infestation. The room was silent as I spoke, everyone listening intently. When I finished, hands shot up all over the room. People had questions. How many chickens would they need? What kind of coop? How much did it cost? Was it hard to maintain them? I answered as best I could, explaining that even a small flock of 4 to 6 chickens could make a significant difference for a typical suburban lot. Then someone asked the obvious question. "So, if chickens can solve our tick problem, why are we banning them?" All eyes turned to Deborah. She looked like she had swallowed a lemon. "The ban is in place to maintain property values and neighborhood standards," she said stiffly. "I would rather have chickens than Lyme disease," someone called out. There were murmurs of agreement throughout the room. Richard cleared his throat. "I think we need to seriously consider amending our bylaws to allow chickens, at least on a trial basis. This is clearly a health and safety issue." "I agree," said one of the other board members, a woman named Sandra. Deborah looked cornered. "This is ridiculous. We cannot just throw out our rules because of a temporary pest problem." "Temporary." A woman in the front row stood up. My daughter has Lyme disease. Do you know what the treatment for that involves? Do you know the long-term effects it can have?" The room erupted in agreement. People started sharing their own stories. Kids who were sick, pets who had gotten tick-borne illnesses, the anxiety of checking for ticks every single day. Deborah tried to regain control, banging her gavel, but the room had turned against her. Even the other board members were looking at her with disapproval. Finally, Richard took over. "I move that we table the current chicken ban and form a committee to draft new bylaws allowing chickens under specific conditions, such as limits on flock size, coop standards, and setback requirements." "I second that motion," Sandra said immediately. "All in favor?" Richard asked. 4 hands went up. Only Deborah's stayed down. "The motion passes," Richard said. "Deborah, I am sorry, but we have to do what is right for the neighborhood." Deborah's face was red with anger and humiliation. She stood abruptly, knocking her chair back. "Fine. Do whatever you want. I am done with this circus." She stormed out of the meeting, leaving her gavel behind. The room buzzed with shocked conversation. Richard looked uncomfortable but resolute. "We will need a new board president," he said. "But for now, let us focus on addressing the tick problem and drafting reasonable chicken regulations." After the meeting, I was mobbed by neighbors asking for advice on getting chickens. Jim was grinning ear to ear. "Dude, you just won." "I guess so," I said, still processing what had just happened. Over the next few weeks, things moved quickly. A committee was formed to draft new chicken regulations, and I was asked to serve on it. We created rules that were reasonable and would prevent the kinds of problems Deborah had been worried about. Coops had to be a certain distance from property lines. Flocks were limited to 6 hens, no roosters, and coops had to meet sanitation standards. Meanwhile, the neighborhood Facebook group became a hub for chicken keeping advice. People posted photos of the coops they were building, asked questions about breeds, and shared tips. Within a month, at least 15 households had gotten chickens, and the tick population plummeted. By late August, the crisis was over. People could let their kids play outside again. Pets were not coming inside covered in ticks. The neighborhood pool reopened. The local news even did a follow-up story about how Willow Creek Estates had solved their tick problem with chickens, and it went semi-viral online. Deborah, meanwhile, had resigned from the HOA board entirely. I heard through the grapevine that she was humiliated by the whole situation and was considering moving to a different neighborhood. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Richard was elected as the new HOA president, and one of his first acts was to formally drop the HOA's opposition to my lawsuit. Marcus and I agreed to drop the case in exchange for the HOA reimbursing my legal fees, which came to about $4,000. It was a fair resolution. On a warm evening in early September, I was sitting in my backyard watching my chickens scratch around in the grass, their feathers glowing golden in the late afternoon sun. Jim came over with a 6-pack of beer, and we sat on my deck, enjoying the peaceful evening. "You know, this whole thing turned out pretty well," Jim said, twisting the cap off his beer. "Yeah," I agreed. "Though I could have done without the months of stress and legal bills." "True. But you stood up for yourself and you ended up helping the whole neighborhood. That has to feel good." It did feel good. I had moved to Willow Creek Estates looking for a quiet place to live and pursue my hobby of keeping chickens. I had not expected to end up in a battle with the HOA, but I also had not expected my chickens to become the solution to a neighborhood health crisis. "To chickens," Jim said, raising his beer. "To chickens," I echoed, clinking my bottle against his. A few days later, I got a knock on my door. When I opened it, I was surprised to see Deborah Morrison standing on my porch. She looked different, smaller somehow, less imperious. She was not wearing her usual designer athleisure but simple jeans and a t-shirt. "Hi," she said, her voice uncertain. "Deborah," I said, genuinely surprised. "What can I do for you?" She took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize. I was wrong about the chickens, and I was wrong to treat you the way I did. I let my ego get in the way of common sense, and I made things difficult for you when I should have been willing to listen." I stood there, not sure what to say. This was the last thing I had expected. "I have been doing a lot of thinking since I resigned from the board," she continued. "I realized that I was more concerned with controlling the neighborhood than actually serving it. That is not what an HOA is supposed to be about. I am sorry, Sebastian. You were right and I was wrong." It would have been easy to hold a grudge, to tell her exactly how much stress and money her stubbornness had cost me. But looking at her standing there, clearly struggling to humble herself, I realized there was no point. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "It takes a lot to admit when you are wrong. Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure. Would you be willing to give me some advice on getting chickens? My kids have been begging, and after everything that happened, I think it might be good for us." I could not help but smile. "Yeah, I can do that. Come on, let me show you my setup." I led her around to my backyard and showed her the coop, introduced her to my chickens, and spent the next half hour answering her questions. She was surprisingly engaged, asking thoughtful questions about care and maintenance. By the end, she seemed genuinely excited about the prospect of keeping chickens. As she was leaving, she turned back to me. "Thank you, Sebastian, and again, I am really sorry." "Water under the bridge," I said, and I meant it. The whole experience had been frustrating and stressful, but it had also brought about real positive change in the neighborhood. People were friendlier now, more willing to talk to each other and help each other out. The shared experience of the tick crisis and the chicken solution had created a sense of community that had not existed before. Over the following months, Willow Creek Estates became known as the Chicken Neighborhood. Articles were written about us in local papers and urban farming blogs. A researcher from Penn State even came to study the tick population in our neighborhood compared to nearby subdivisions, and the data confirmed what we already knew. Our chickens were making a real difference. The new HOA board, under Richard's leadership, was a dramatic improvement. They were responsive to residents' concerns, transparent in their decision-making, and reasonable in their enforcement of rules. The neighborhood felt like a community rather than a dictatorship. As for me, I continued to enjoy my chickens and the daily gift of fresh eggs. I had also become something of a local chicken-keeping expert, regularly giving advice to neighbors, and even doing a few presentations at the local library and garden clubs. One Saturday afternoon in October, the HOA organized a neighborhood potluck in the common area. It was a beautiful fall day, and nearly every household turned out. There was food, music, and kids running around playing. Several people had brought dishes made with eggs from their chickens, and there was a friendly competition for the best chicken-related recipe. I stood there with a plate of food, watching my neighbors laugh and talk, and I felt genuinely happy. This was what I had wanted when I moved here, a real community where people knew each other and looked out for each other. Jim came up beside me, his own plate loaded with food. "You know what the best part of all this is," he said. "What is that? Nobody is talking about property values anymore. They are just enjoying their lives." He was right. The obsession with property values and appearances that had driven Deborah's enforcement crusade had been replaced with something more meaningful: actual community. Later that evening, as the sun set and the party wound down, Richard approached me. "Sebastian, I wanted to thank you," he said. You could have just given up and moved away when Deborah was making your life difficult. Instead, you fought back, and it made this neighborhood a better place. I just wanted to keep my chickens, I said with a shrug. It was more than that. You stood up for what was right, and you made us all think about what kind of community we wanted to be. That matters. As I drove home that night, I thought about the past few months and how much had changed. I had faced down an unreasonable HOA president, fought a legal battle, and inadvertently solved a neighborhood health crisis. It was not the quiet suburban life I had envisioned when I moved to Willow Creek Estates, but it was better in many ways. My chickens were waiting for me when I got home, roosting peacefully in their coop. I checked on them, making sure they had food and water for the night, and then stood there in the gathering darkness, listening to their soft clucking sounds. These birds had caused so much trouble and solved so many problems. They were just chickens, doing what chickens do, eating bugs, laying eggs, and living their simple chicken lives. But they had become symbols of something larger, a reminder that sometimes the simplest solutions are the best ones, and that community rules should serve the community, not control it. As I walked back to my house, I felt grateful for the whole experience, even the hard parts. I had learned a lot about standing up for myself, about perseverance, and about the importance of community. And I had helped change Willow Creek Estates from a place governed by fear and control into a real neighborhood where people supported each other. The next morning, I woke to the familiar sound of my chickens announcing the sunrise. I went outside to collect eggs and found 7 perfect specimens, one for each chicken plus a bonus. It was going to be a good day. Over the following year, the chicken-keeping trend continued in Willow Creek Estates. By the spring, more than 30 households had chickens. The neighborhood had become a model for sustainable suburban living, and we were featured in a documentary about urban and suburban farming. The tick problem never returned to the levels we had seen that first summer. The occasional tick would show up, but it was nothing compared to the infestation that had sparked the whole chicken revolution. Deborah and her family did end up getting chickens, 4 Australorps that her kids named after Harry Potter characters. She posted photos of them on the neighborhood Facebook group, and her transformation from chicken opponent to chicken advocate was complete. She never rejoined the HOA board, but she did become active in other neighborhood activities, organizing book clubs and community service projects. She seemed happier, more relaxed, less concerned with controlling everything around her. As for me, I expanded my flock slightly, adding 2 more chickens, a silver-laced Wyandotte and an Easter egger who laid beautiful blue eggs. I also started a small side business selling fertile eggs and offering chicken-keeping consultations. It was not much money, but it was rewarding to help other people start their own flocks. The lawsuit was a distant memory now, though it had taught me valuable lessons about HOAs and property rights. I had learned that HOA rules, while binding, are not absolute. They can be challenged, especially when they are enforced unfairly or when they conflict with common sense. I had also learned that standing up for yourself, even when it is difficult and expensive, can lead to positive changes that benefit everyone. Jim and I remained good friends, often sitting on one of our decks in the evening, drinking beer and watching our chickens forage. His kids loved my chickens and would come over to help collect eggs and feed them treats. The Hendersons, my elderly neighbors on the other side, also got chickens eventually. They were in their 70s and had kept chickens as children on farms in western Pennsylvania. Having chickens again brought back happy memories for them, and they were excellent chicken keepers, with a beautiful coop that Mr. Henderson had built himself. One evening in June, Almost exactly 2 years after the tick crisis had begun, I was featured on a local news segment about urban farming. The reporter came to my house, filmed my chickens, and interviewed me about the whole experience. "So when the HOA first fined you, did you ever imagine it would lead to this?" the reporter asked, gesturing at my expanded coop and the thriving birds. "Not at all," I said honestly. "I just wanted to keep my chickens. I never expected them to solve a health crisis or change the whole neighborhood culture." What would you say to other people facing similar battles with their HOAs? I thought about that for a moment. I would say do your research, know your rights, and do not give up if you believe you are in the right. But also be willing to compromise and find solutions that work for everyone. The goal is not to win a fight, it is to build a better community. The segment aired a few days later and got a positive response. I received emails from people around the country who were facing similar HOA disputes, asking for advice. I tried to help where I could, sharing what I had learned from my experience. That summer was peaceful and productive. My garden flourished, fertilized by chicken manure. My chickens laid eggs consistently, and I had more than enough to share with neighbors and friends. The neighborhood continued to thrive, with the chicken keeping community organizing occasional meetups and workshops. In August, Richard announced that he would not be seeking re-election as HOA president. He had done a great job, but it was time for new leadership. Several people were nominated, and a woman named Lisa Chen was elected. She was a scientist who worked at the university, and she brought a data-driven, common-sense approach to HOA governance. Under her leadership, the HOA continued to evolve, dropping several outdated and unnecessary rules and focusing on things that actually mattered to residents. One of Lisa's first initiatives was to create a community garden in one of the common areas, with plots available for any resident who wanted to grow vegetables. It was hugely popular, and it further strengthened the sense of community in the neighborhood. Looking back on everything that had happened, I realized that the chicken coop fine had been a blessing in disguise. Yes, it had been stressful and expensive to fight, but it had also catalyzed positive changes that made Willow Creek Estates a genuinely wonderful place to live. The neighborhood had gone from being a sterile collection of houses governed by arbitrary rules to being a real community where people knew each other, helped each other, and worked together to solve problems. My chickens, those 6 original birds who had caused so much controversy, were getting older now. Chickens typically lay eggs for 3 to 5 years, and mine were approaching that age. Their egg production had slowed, but I would never get rid of them. They had earned their retirement, and they would live out their days in my backyard, scratching in the grass and taking dust baths in the sun. I had also started thinking about the future. I was considering running for the HOA board myself, not because I wanted power or control, but because I wanted to help ensure that the positive changes we had made would continue. I had learned a lot about community governance and resident rights, and I thought I could contribute something valuable. One evening in September, I hosted a chicken keeping workshop in my backyard for new and prospective chicken owners. About 15 people showed up, including several families with kids. I walked them through the basics: choosing breeds, building a coop, daily care, health issues, and predator protection. The kids were especially engaged, asking endless questions and delighting in holding the chickens. Watching them, I was reminded of why I had wanted chickens in the first place. There was something special about having a connection to where your food comes from, about caring for animals, about the simple rhythms of farm life even in a suburban setting. After the workshop, several people lingered to chat. One couple mentioned that they had just moved to the neighborhood specifically because they had heard about the chicken-friendly bylaws. Another person said that property values in Willow Creek Estates had actually increased over the past 2 years, contrary to Deborah's predictions. Apparently, the urban farming aspect and strong sense of community were attractive to buyers. As the last guests left and I cleaned up, I felt a deep sense of contentment. This was exactly what I had hoped for when I moved here, a place where I could pursue my interests, be part of a community, and live a life that aligned with my values. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. My chickens had already put themselves to bed in the coop, as they did every evening at dusk. I closed the coop door to protect them from predators and stood there for a moment, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood. Kids playing, someone mowing their lawn, the distant sound of music from a backyard gathering. It was an ordinary evening in an ordinary neighborhood, but it felt extraordinary to me because of everything that had gone into creating it. The legal battle, the tick crisis, the community transformation, all of it had started with 6 chickens and a $50 fine. It was a reminder that you never know how things will turn out, that standing up for what you believe in can have ripple effects you never anticipate. As I walked back to my house, I saw Jim on his deck and waved. He waved back, holding up a beer in salute. The Hendersons were sitting on their porch swing enjoying the evening. A few houses down, I could see someone tending to their chickens in the fading light. This was home. This was community. This was what made all the struggle worthwhile. Inside my house, I scrambled some eggs from my chickens for dinner, the yolks bright orange and delicious. As I ate, I thought about writing a guide for other people who might want to challenge unreasonable HOA rules. I had learned so much through this process, and maybe I could help others avoid some of the pitfalls I had encountered. But that was a project for another day. Tonight, I was just going to enjoy my dinner, maybe watch a movie and be grateful for this strange, wonderful life I had built in Willow Creek Estates. The next morning, I was surprised to receive an email from a national news network. They had seen the local segment about my chicken story and wanted to do a feature on it. They were interested in the angle of HOAs, property rights, and how suburban communities were adapting to incorporate more sustainable practices. I agreed to the interview, which was conducted a week later. A crew came to my house, filmed my chickens, interviewed me and several neighbors, and even got a comment from Richard about how the HOA had changed its approach to governance. When the segment aired on the national morning show, my phone exploded with messages. Friends from college I had not talked to in years reached out. My parents called, proud and amused. The neighborhood Facebook group was buzzing with excitement about being on national television. But more importantly, I started receiving messages from people all over the country who were inspired by the story. Some were fighting their own HOA battles. Others were considering getting chickens. Many just wanted to say that the story had made them think differently about their own neighborhoods and communities. One message particularly stood out. It was from a woman in Oregon who had been fined by her HOA for a vegetable garden in her front yard. She had been considering giving up, but my story inspired her to fight back. She ended up not only winning her case but also getting her HOA bylaws changed to explicitly allow front yard gardens. She credited my story with giving her the courage to stand up for herself. Reading that message, I felt a sense of purpose I had not expected. My chicken battle had not just been about me and my neighborhood. It had become part of a larger conversation about property rights, community governance, and how we balance individual freedom with collective standards. The attention died down after a few weeks, and life returned to normal. But the impact of everything that had happened continued to reverberate through Willow Creek Estates and beyond. The following spring, I did decide to run for the HOA board, and I was elected along with two other new members who shared a vision of reasonable, community-focused governance. Our first major initiative was to create a comprehensive review of all HOA rules, eliminating outdated restrictions and updating others to reflect the current needs and values of the neighborhood. We also established a formal appeals process for violations, ensuring that homeowners would always have a fair hearing before fines were assessed. It was something that should have existed all along, but Deborah's administration had ignored that aspect of proper governance. Under the new board, Willow Creek Estates continued to thrive. The chicken population stabilized at around 30 to 40 households, enough to keep the tick population under control without overwhelming the neighborhood. We never had another tick crisis like that first summer. Other sustainable practices also took root. Several people installed rain barrels and composting systems. The community garden expanded. Some residents started beekeeping, which required another round of bylaw amendments, but this time the process was smooth and collaborative. Deborah remained in the neighborhood, and while she and I were never close friends, we developed a cordial relationship. She would occasionally ask me questions about chicken keeping or other neighborhood matters, and I was always happy to help. She had genuinely changed, becoming less controlling and more open-minded. Her kids, now teenagers, had taken over care of their chickens and had even started a small egg-selling business. 5 years after the initial fine, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed. The lawsuit seemed like ancient history now, a necessary catalyst for transformation, but not something I dwelled on. My chickens, now a mix of the original retirees and younger layers I had added over the years, continued to bring me joy every day. I had also met someone special, a woman named Zara Parker, who had moved to the neighborhood 2 years after the chicken revolution. She was a veterinarian who specialized in farm animals and exotics, and she loved that our neighborhood was so chicken-friendly. We had bonded over our shared interest in sustainable living, and she had moved in with me 6 months ago, bringing her own 3 chickens with her. Zara was exactly the kind of partner I had not known I was looking for. Smart, funny, independent, and completely comfortable with the fact that we spent our Sunday mornings cleaning out chicken coops and planning our garden. One Saturday morning, as we were having coffee on the deck and watching our combined flock of 9 chickens forage in the yard, Zara asked me if I ever regretted the whole HOA fight. Never, I said without hesitation. It was hard at the time, but it led to so many good things. This neighborhood, meeting you, helping other people, I would do it all again. She smiled and squeezed my hand. Good, because I am pretty sure our chickens are not going anywhere. Definitely not, I agreed. As we sat there in the peaceful morning, I thought about how a simple $50 fine had set off a chain of events that had transformed not just my life, but an entire community. It was a reminder that sometimes the obstacles we face are not really obstacles at all, but opportunities for growth and positive change. The chickens continued to scratch and peck, oblivious to the role they had played in this transformation. They were just being chickens, living their simple, instinctual lives. But to me, they represented something more. The power of standing up for what you believe in, the importance of community, and the simple truth that sometimes the best solutions are the ones that have been around for thousands of years. Willow Creek Estates had become more than just a place to live. It had become a real community, one where people looked out for each other, where reasonable people could disagree, and then find common ground, where the rules served the residents rather than the other way around. And it had all started with 6 chickens and one stubborn guy who refused to back down. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, Zara and I finished our coffee and got ready to head to the farmer's market. We had eggs to sell, neighbors to chat with, and a beautiful day ahead of us. Life was good in Willow Creek Estates. The chickens had won,